Fellow mourners, countrymen and women, today marks the 9th day since our 60th Republican President, His Excellency Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu, left us to be with the Lord. And as we speak right now, for those of us who loved the man, our hearts are still very, very broken. It is as if it happened yesterday. Fellow mourners, what has made this situation even more painful is the fact that there has been a lot of acrimony related to the funeral arrangements of the late former Republican president. And the current president, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, had the opportunity to address the nation last evening, and it is our considered view that his address to the nation did not go far enough to address the impasse that is currently ongoing regarding the funeral arrangements of the 60th Republican president. Before I proceed, countrymen and women, allow me to first of all apologize for bringing this press briefing 30 minutes earlier. It is because I received information that those of our colleagues who didn't want us to talk about this situation were planning to disrupt the internet connectivity, thereby making this press briefing impossible. That is the reason why we decided to bring this press briefing 30 minutes earlier, so that by the time they disrupt our internet and by the time they disrupt our network, then we would have been done with this press briefing. So if you do note that the press briefing cuts without proper formalities, then you can best know that our internet has been interrupted. Allow me to proceed, countrymen and women. Before I dwell on the address to the nation by the current president, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, yesterday, allow me to go in the background of the life after office of the 60th Republican president and his interaction with the current government as well as the current Republican president. There is no question. I think it is something that everyone was able to see for themselves, that there was an acrimonious relationship between the 60th Republican president and the current Republican president. And that is not unusual. Most of the time, when you have a former president and a current president, it is not unusual that you would have not so good relations, not only in Zambia, but in other countries. So the poor relations that were there between the two men is something that for some of us, we didn't take to be a very big exception. However, what we took to be a big exception is the fact that those bad relations even spilled into a matter of life and death situation, whereby the current Republican president prevented Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu from going to seek medical treatment in South Africa, not on one occasion, not on two occasions, but on 3 occasions. When someone is sick and they want to seek medical treatment, it is a matter of humanity that you must allow your fellow human being, no matter whether they are your friend or your rival or your enemy, to be able to seek the necessary medical treatment. But the current Republican president and his government prevented the 60th Republican president from seeking medical treatment. And even his ability to go out of the country to South Africa, where he eventually died, it was something that he had to innovate. He left the country like a fugitive, and even the person at the airport who cleared him to leave the country was fired from his job. So that is the background, countrymen and women. And that background is necessary so that an average Zambian can try to understand why the family is demanding for the conditions that they are demanding. For clarity, let us dwell on the demands of the family. What is it that the family is demanding? And are the demands of the family reasonable or they are unreasonable? The first demand which the family is making is that the state or the government, as the case may be, should not be involved in repatriating the remains of the 60th Republican president. That the family should be the one to repatriate the remains of the former Republican president from South Africa up to the airport, whichever airport it will be, whether it will be Lusaka International Airport or Simon Mwansakapwepwe Airport. That is the demand of the family, and that the state should only take over from the airport. So let us deal with that particular demand, and let us use our sober minds, regardless of our political affiliation, whether we are UPND, whether we are PEP, whether we are PF, whether we are any other political party, or whether we are non-partisan. Let us apply our fair minds. Is that demand by the family so unreasonable that we should have this impasse regarding the funeral of the 60th Republican president? I don't know about your judgment, but from my standpoint, this is a reasonable demand. It is a reasonable demand for the simple reason that the president had to sneak out of the country. He had to sneak out of the country. So why should he come back to the country with the state escort? Let the family which took him out of the country bring him back to the country, and then the state can take over at the airport. Now, before we leave this particular demand of the family, let us look at the reasons advanced by the state or by President Hakainde Hichilema and his government why they would not want to agree with this particular demand of the family. So far, we haven't seen any reasons. The president addressed the nation last evening. He did not give any reasons or advance any reasons why he feels that this particular demand of the family is so unreasonable that the funeral of the 60th Republican president should remain in abeyance for eternity. So we have heard the reasons from the family, but we haven't heard any reasons from the government why they would want to insist to take over the body of the 60th Republican president from the hospital in South Africa all the way to Zambia. So that is demand number one. Let's look at the second demand. The family are saying that the current president, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, should not attend the funeral of the late 60th Republican president. And they are saying that that is his wish. That is something that was in his will. So that is the demand of the family, and they've given the background. And part of the background is that the current president contributed significantly to the death of the 60th Republican president by denying him from going to seek medical attention in South Africa. So the reasoning of the family is that someone who contributed to the death of their beloved father, husband, uncle should not participate or should not be present at the funeral. The question, countrymen and women, and on this again, I want you to apply your sober minds and a fair assessment. The question is that an unreasonable request? Is it unreasonable that the family should demand that President Hakainde Hichilema must not attend the funeral? Is that request by the family so unreasonable that it must bring about this deadlock, this impasse, that it must put the funeral of the 60th Republican president into abeyance? Is that an unreasonable demand? Because a family determines who should attend their funeral. The issue of a state funeral is an issue that must be clarified. When you talk about a state funeral, countrymen and women, first of all, it is not defined anywhere. We do not have a specific act of parliament in this country which defines a state funeral or which differentiates a state funeral from an official funeral, or from any other funeral where the state participates, or the level of participation of the state. So the issue of a state funeral is something that is born more out of custom and practice than something that is enshrined in any written law. So when you talk about a state funeral, from my understanding, which might be different from your understanding, that given, from my understanding, a state funeral simply means that the deceased person is accorded the necessary state accolades. So the question is, what are those state accolades? Those state accolades, countrymen and women, include the body of a deceased being on a military carriage and being given military escort, and in the case of a president, that person being buried at Embassy Park, which is near Cabinet Office, and also being given the 7-gun salute. To me, that is my understanding of a state funeral. Nowhere is it written that a state funeral must include the attendance of the current Republican president, even if the family does not want the current Republican president from attending. Nowhere is it written that. So the question is, on what basis is President Hakainde Hichilema insisting that he must attend the funeral of the late 60th Republican president, and that if he is not allowed to attend, then there shall be no state funeral? On what basis, countrymen and women? On what basis? From my standpoint, there is no basis whatsoever. Of course, I understand that some of you might look at this issue differently, and I respect your opinion. Let us move on to the third demand of the family, which I wouldn't really call a demand. I would rather call it a request, in fact. The third request of the family is that the body of the 60th Republican president must be given church services in 3 towns. That is it. Number 1, Ndola, where he was born. Number 2, Petauke, where he comes from. And number 3, Lusaka, where he lived. That is the third request of the family. The question is that an unreasonable request, or is it a request which does not have precedence? When the late former president Levi Patrick Manawasa died in 2007, he was taken to each of the 9 provinces of Zambia. He was taken there. So the question is, why would it be so difficult for the state to facilitate and honor the wish of the family and take the body of the 60th Republican president, His Excellency Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu, to Ndola, to Lusaka, to Petauke? What is so difficult with that? Why is it that President Hakainde Hichilema finds that particular request so unreasonable that it should be a basis on which to hold the funeral arrangements of the late former President Edgar Lungu in abeyance for eternity? On what basis? If President Hakainde Hichilema's government tells us that they do not have a budget to facilitate the transportation of the body of the 60th Republican president, then they should tell us. Those of us who loved Mr. Lungu are going to scrounge around. We are going to put together some money, and we are going to buy fuel and hire a private helicopter to take Mr. Lungu's body to Ndola, to Petauke, and back to Lusaka for his burial. So the state must give categorical answers to each of the requests, each of the 3 requests of the family. We expect categorical answers from the state. If they don't have resources, if the ZAF helicopters don't have fuel, but they are available, tizaguliramu fuel ma helicopter ya ZAF, so that wamtenge muntu watu wamete zokonda ise wampereke kwa mene family Easter demand kuti wakamuoneko waka passing my final goodbyes, so that when our beloved ECL rests in his grave, he's going to rest peacefully. He's going to rest peacefully. If the state compels us who love the ECL to make shortcuts in terms of his funeral arrangements, yes, the state might succeed to eventually lay him to rest, but he's not going to lay to rest in peace. He will not, because his wishes would not have been accorded to him. And those who loved him will have ourselves to blame. We are the ones who are alive. Israel cannot speak for himself. He is no more. So it is up to us who are alive, who loved him, to speak and advocate for his wishes. And from my standpoint, countrymen and women, those wishes are not unreasonable wishes. My challenge to President Hakainde Hichilema and his government is that, just like the family has given a detailed explanation of the reasoning behind each of the three requests, his government should also give a detailed explanation why they find each one of the three requests unreasonable. A detailed explanation. Instead of accusing us who are advocating for the late Republican president of seeking political mileage, of bringing anarchy, or any other names you want to label us, let us operate like reasonable, mature, adult citizens. Let us work in a reasonable manner to resolve this impasse. The family has put on the table their reasoning, their demands, three demands. And they've explained the background to each of those demands. They've explained that demand number one, they do not want the state to have a private moment with the body of the late 60th Republican president. That is why the family wants to transport the body themselves from South Africa to Zambia, to the airport, and the state can take over at the airport. So we've heard the reasoning of the family. If the state, since the state is disagreeing with that demand, let them explain to us. Let President Hakainde Hichilema explain to the nation why he feels that the state should have a private moment with the body of the late Republican president. Why should they have a private moment? They should explain to us. Maybe once they give their explanation, it is going to make sense, and we are going to say, oh, okay, no, you, the state, your explanation makes sense, therefore, you facilitate the transportation of the late ECL from South Africa to the airport, so that you can have a private moment, a private final moment with the body of ECL. Maybe it will make sense, but they need to give us an explanation, and then we'll assess that explanation. Number two demand, that the current president, Hakainde Hichilema, should not attend the funeral of the 60th Republican president. That is the demand of the family. Since the government and the head of state, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, do not agree with that demand, they should tell us. Let them explain to us. Let President Hakainde Hichilema explain to us and tell us, no, I cannot be prevented from attending the funeral of ECL because of ABCD. The family has given their reasons. It is because they feel that the current president, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, and his government contributed to the death of the 60th Republican president by preventing him from going to seek timely medical advice. And that had he gone to South Africa for a medical checkup area, the cancer which he had would have been diagnosed earlier. And we all know that when it comes to cancer, the earlier it is diagnosed, the greater the chances of it being successfully treated. So the family feels that HH and his government contributed to the death of the deceased. That is the reason why they are making that demand. So if President Hakainde wants to insist that he wants to attend the funeral, he must also explain to us why he is insisting that he must attend the funeral. And that if he doesn't attend the funeral, then there shall be no funeral. He should tell us. Maybe when he explains himself in detail, we are going to hear him out, and maybe he will make sense. Maybe we'll shift our position and say, no, for sure, let President HH attend. But without an explanation, we can't know that. We can't. It means this impasse is going to continue. And then the last request for the late ECL to have 3 church services, Ndora, Lusaka, Petauke. Let the state tell us where the challenge is. Again, like I said, if it is the issue of fuel, walibewaza for fuel, tizasagira ise tizagwira matomba, tizagwira mo fuel ma helicopter yazafo, so that muntu watu wamente zokonda aende kupetauke, aende kundola, akalibe kubwera mu Lusaka kuti timu baringe. As simple and straightforward as all that. So countrymen and women, my final appeal is that we are causing ourselves as a nation unnecessary embarrassment. I saw this matter on Al Jazeera. I saw this matter on BBC. And sooner or later it will be on all the international media outlets. And what is coming out is that there is an impasse in Zambia regarding the burial of the 60th Republican president. Is that necessary? Is that necessary? My answer to that question is that it is not necessary. My view, countrymen and women, is that the demands of a family are reasonable demands. If you look back in the history of this country, it is not the first time that there has been some conflict between the government and the family of a late former president. We've had such issues before. We had an issue in 2007 whereby the family of the late former president Mwanawasa wanted him to be buried in Kanakantapa. They even started digging the burial site for him. And it took reconciliation of the family and the government for us to resolve to have Levi Patrick Mwanawasa buried at Memorial Park. And that took humility and wisdom from the then Rupia Banda government to engage the family. These are people who are grieving, remember? These are people who are grieving. These are people who have just lost their loved one. So when you are engaging them as a government, you are engaging these people, the family. You need to engage them with humility. You can't engage them with arrogance. And yet they feel that you contributed to the demise of their loved one. It means you can't make progress. It's a matter of common sense. It's a matter of common sense. Similarly, and that issue was resolved in 2007. Eventually, we managed to bury the late former president, Levi Patrick Mwanawasa, at Embassy Park. And now, when you look at the difference there, that was a fundamental difference. Because we were, the dispute between the family and the government at that time was about the burial site. And that is a fundamental issue. It can't be compared to the current differences where you are talking about the family privately repatriating the body up to the airport where the state takes over, where you are talking about President Hakainde Hichilema being prevented from attending, where you are talking about ECL being taken to Ndola, Lusaka, and or rather Petauke, and finally Lusaka. These are superficial differences that we are talking about today, countrymen and women. These ones today about ECL funeral, these are superficial differences. They are non-substantial differences compared to the differences that were there between the government and the family in 2007. Even in 2021, the family of the late first Republican president, KK, wanted him to be buried next to his wife, Beth Kaunda, at their farm in State Lodge. And they didn't want him to be buried at Memorial, at Embassy Park. Again, it took a lot of humility and engagement until a resolution was made. But those were fundamental differences between government and the family at the time, because they involved the official burial place of a Republican president. The current differences, the family of ECL is not saying that ECL should not be buried at Embassy Park. They are agreeable. They are very agreeable that he should be buried at Embassy Park. They are only requesting that the government of President Hakainde Hichilema should not have a private moment with the body of the deceased, because they don't trust the government for good reasons, if you ask me. And they are asking that President Hakainde Hichilema should not attend the funeral, should not be anywhere near the body of ECL. Those are superficial differences. They are not substantial differences when you look at the differences that existed in past funerals of late former presidents of this country. These are superficial differences. So this crisis, this impasse, this deadlock that we have today is an unnecessary deadlock. It is a deadlock that is founded in the arrogance of the current government and the current Republican president. At a time of mourning, President Hakainde Hichilema should not be showing us arrogance. He should be showing us humility. He should be mourning with the family. If President Hakainde Hichilema was a humble president, what he would have done when he heard that ECL had died, and that the leadership of the Patriotic Front had convened, and the family had convened two mourning places, which is the Patriotic Front Secretariat and the residence of ECL. What President Hakainde Hichilema should have done, and what I would have done myself if I was president, I would have gone to the PF Secretariat. You go to the PF Secretariat and you sign in the official book of condolences at the PF Secretariat. That would have shown President Hakainde Hichilema as a humble person, as someone who is willing to mourn the deceased President Edgar Lungu in peace and according to his wishes. That's what he should have done. If anything, he should have even told people at his farm in Namwara there to say, bring 10 bulls, 10 cows, slaughter them here at the PF Secretariat so that these people eat. They want to mourn here, let us respect where they want to mourn from. That is what he should have done. That would have shown humility. Even those of us who don't agree with him on most occasions would have embraced him and said, our president, Hakainde Hichilema, varina wisdom, varina humility. Or still verana now pari vinango, but he even kani ICO, he even showing a humility. Even if there's one to prevent ICO from going to seek medical attention, we are going to bury all that, and we are going to embrace him and his government and mourn ICO together. That is what we would have done. But the first thing that President Hakainde Hichilema did was to create a parallel mourning arrangement. You go and establish Belvedere Lodge against the wishes of the family. Who are you trying to mourn at Belvedere? According against the wishes of a family, you want to take the funeral to Belvedere. You take 7 days without appearing on TV to announce the demise of your elder brother. In terms of a presidential family, they were remaining the two of them. There's one but 7, but when 5 were gone. They were just remaining waviri mmimba yao. ECL and himself HH. Mulimo waviri mmimba ya maiwanu. Mkuu wako amwalira. You take 7 days to announce the funeral of your elder brother. Mr. President, sir, that is not humility. Let us show humility. Let us show humility. Let us not let our positions override reasonableness. Let us remain reasonable citizens so that we can be united. You can't talk about unity when you took 7 days before announcing the funeral of your elder brother. Mwenzalimo 7 mmimba ya maiwanu. 5 wanamwalira kudala. Masara waviri. Elder brother wako wakamba sinivera bwino nyendeko kuchipatala. Wamkanina. On 3 occasions. Wamkanina elder brother wako. Nishimulimo chabe waviri. Masara chabe waviri. Mmimba ya mai wako. Then elder brother wako amwalira. You take 7 days kushita announce maliro ya elder brother wako. Mkuu wako. Where is the love there, Mr. President? Where is the humility? We've had political differences in this country. And we have a history of political differences. We practice very aggressive type of politics. That is the nature of our politics. Maybe one day it will change, maybe it will not change. But that should not prevent us from being human beings. It should not make us lose our humanity. We must be able to still retain our humanity. We have a history of how the relationship was between the late former President Michael Sata, who was then main opposition leader under Patriotic Front, and the late former President Levi Patrick Mwanawasa, who was the third Republican president. We saw how acrimonious that relationship was. Every opportunity that Sata had to talk about ECL, to talk about Mwanawasa, he would call him all sorts of names. He called him cabbage. And instead of Mwanawasa taking that with enmity, he took it with humor. He started calling himself a steak instead of a cabbage. You know, he took it with humor. Mwanawasa didn't go about locking up everybody, locking up Sata for calling him a cabbage or anything like that. In other words, there was tolerance. There was tolerance. That is the history of our politics. Tolerance. Okay? And when, despite that acrimonious relationship between Sata and Mwanawasa, when Sata collapsed and fell ill, he was just an opposition leader. He collapsed and fell ill. Levi Mwanawasa ordered that Sata should be evacuated immediately. And probably that saved Sata's life. and allowed him to become future president. Okay? So there was that political differences, there was that political acrimony, but when it came to matters of life and death, Mwanawasa didn't say, SATA has collapsed, okay, let him die, so that my political life can be prolonged, because this one is challenging me too much. No, he didn't do that. He allowed the humanity in him to come out, and he took SATA, flew him out of the country, ensured he received top-notch medical treatment as if he was a head of state, but he was a mere opposition leader. That is the love that this country, Zambia, is founded on. Not the situation you have given us, Mr. President, Hakainde Hichilema, where your elder brother, mkulu wako, mwasachabe waviri mmimba ya mayano, mkulu wako akamba sinivera bwino, mwono wanga niendeko kuchipatala, atiyae. Sinivera bwino mwono wanga niendeko kuchipatala, atiyae. Even day amina atawa mcharo, atawa mkantri kuenda kuchipatala, muntu wamena mpitisa pa airport, mampisha na nshita. Nikunghala kwa bwanjo kwa president. Nikunghala kwa bwanjo. So, we have this situation, but we are not saying that we are going to dwell on the wrong things you did to ECL. We have a funeral right now. We have a funeral. Tifuna timulire uyu muntu, timuike apumule. We don't want to continue harassing ECL even in his death. No. What you are doing, President Hakainde Hichilema, right now, by creating this unnecessary crisis, this unnecessary conflict, is that you are harassing the 60th Republican president even in his death. You are preventing the 60th Republican president from going to rest in peace. That is what you are doing, President Hakainde Hichilema. And my request to you, Mr. President, is please stop it. It's not necessary. You harassed ECL enough when he was alive. You contributed to his death. That is enough. That is more than enough. Right now, ECL is in a deep freezer in South Africa. He's supposed to be resting in peace. How long do you want him to remain in a deep freezer in South Africa? He's not resting in peace. We cannot have a former Republican president just in remaining in a deep freezer in South Africa forever. We can't have that, Mr. President. You have tormented your brother enough. Please allow him to be mourned. Please abide by the demands of the family. Allow the family to repatriate the body to Ndola International Airport or Lusaka International Airport, whatever the case might be. Stay away from the funeral as demanded by the family, and allow him to have 3 church services. Provide those Zambia Air Force helicopters. Provide them so that it can allow our 60th Republican president to rest in peace. That is my request, Mr. President. That is my request. Show us your humility. Don't show us your arrogance and flexing your power. We know you are the president. We know you are commander-in-chief of the armed forces. You know you control the police. We know you control all the guns in the armory. We know that. It's a matter of fact. But don't abuse that power. Use that power for the benefit of the people. Okay? Use the power that you have, the power that you wield as a head of state for the benefit of the people and not to harass the people, no. So my submission, Mr. President, before Nkaribo Pakisa Mauma Nyingi, my final submission is, please, if ECL wronged you in any other way that we don't know, my appeal on his behalf is, forgive him. Please forgive him. But please allow him to now be buried by agreeing to the demands of the family. The superficial demands, because these are not critical demands. It was going to be critical demands if the family was saying, no, tiendo mushika kupeta uke, because njeko amene anachokera. Then you can say, but Chapamanje protocol is going to be broken because other presidents are buried at Embassy Park. But the family is agreeing he will be buried at Embassy Park. The family is agreeing they will hand over the body to the state, but not in South Africa, here in Zambia. Those are small, small demands, Mr. President. Allow your brother to be buried so that his soul can rest in peace. If you have any more grudge, please don't take it out on ECL. Mr. President, if you have any more grudge, if you have any more hatred in your heart, you feel that you did not punish ECL enough, and you still feel I need to punish this guy by keeping him in a deep freezer in South Africa, in a South African mortuary. He must remain in that deep freezer for 1 year. Tukupapatanya President, mkurukireni, mkuru wanu isiyo mkurulukireni tumpapatani ngati muli na chikongo chilichonse ngati muli na hatred iliyonse kuli isiyo osayipereka ku isiyo isiyo amwalira kudala afunika yendo pumula manje kumanda timpereke timgoneke apumule. Okay? Ngati muli na chikongo chinangu chizasala hatred iliyonse izasala mungaitosere palise vamene tizasala kumbuyo mungachitenanise vili vose vamene mfuna kuti muchose hatred yemweze munasala nayo ye nasala yali menda kuli isiyo muchosere palise ngati mfuna immediately burial ya isiyo mungachitenge naise muchitenanise vamene mfuna kuti ija hatred yamene nasalako ija yamene siyo nasira pali isiyo ye nasalako ija isiriretu mungaichosere palise vamene tezo mkono palibe vuto sitiza kama vili vonse ngati ija hatred yali menda ye nasalako mufuna ichosera palise sitiza dandaula but isiyo avutika kwa kwana sanga pitirize isiyo kunkhala mu deep freezer kumochale ku South Africa isi amene timkonda chitiwa wa daily please ngati anakula kuyani chikuru isiyo a president mkurulukireni ngati simkwaniza kumkurulukira nishi hatred yeiza salako pasanyise ichosereni Paris tapapata zikomo tikaiboka mbava mbili zikomo kwambiri. Thank you.